certified clinical health coach at the University of Delaware. Also, I'm a clinical instructor in behavioral health and nutrition. And lastly, I'm a clinic director for the Clinical Health Coaching Research and Training Center at the University of Delaware. I've been asked by NAMI to come in and talk a little bit about some things that pertain to health coaching, and the one we came up with was self-compassion, when we're super excited to talk about it. My colleague Diane Bennick and Dr. Kelsey Chambers will be joining us today. But before we start, I'm just going to do a little housekeeping to talk about kind of the state that we're in right now and get us set for our session today. And after I do that, I'll go ahead and invite everyone in and they can introduce themselves as well. So we'll get started. So this session is offered by NAMI Delaware. NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI Delaware is the state agency affiliated with the organization NAMI. There are NAMIs in every state. So if you're watching from outside of Delaware, you can find your closest one by visiting the website NAMI.org, NAMI.org. You can find out what programs are available close to you. So NAMI Delaware offers support groups, education and awareness programs, advocacy, and even housing. During COVID-19, their programming has switched to virtual formats like this one on Facebook Live. They are holding their support and social meetings online using Zoom. You can learn more about NAMI Delaware at their website, namidelaware.org, NAMIDELAWARE.org, or by calling their helpline. The number should be streaming below on the screen. Before we introduce ourselves and get started on this presentation, I just want to remind you of one more thing. You're not alone. This experience we're having with COVID-19 is not like anything we've experienced before, and it may feel really overwhelming at times. Please know that there are resources available to you at any time, 24/7, if you need to talk to someone. You should see the crisis text line number on the screen below. This is just one way to reach out and connect, but there are others as well. If you're looking for more resources, go ahead and check out NAMI Delaware's resources listed on the website. Also, we invite you to post any questions you have for us in the comment section, and we'll do our best to have time at the end to answer them. Please keep in mind that this is not a public forum and this session is being recorded. Therefore, it's important not to disclose confidential information. We will be sharing resources with you throughout the session, and we'll provide contact information if you'd like to get some follow-up information and speak with us privately. Please remember, we are all in this together. So without further ado, I would love to introduce the people that I'm working with today, Diane Bennick and Dr. Kelsey Chambers. Kelsey, can you give us a little bit of an intro to you?
Yes. Thanks, Tara. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Chambers. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work for the Center for Counseling and Student Development at the University of Delaware.
And my name is Diane Bennick. I'm a clinical health coach at the University of Delaware, and I work alongside Tara at the Clinical Health Coaching and Research Training Center. My background is in nursing, and I'm also nationally certified in health and wellness coaching. Now that we've got all the introductions done, let's get to the wonderful topic that we have for tonight. Kelsey, can you help us define what self-compassion is?
Absolutely. So self-compassion means having compassion for yourself. And it's really no different than having compassion for others. So if I were to ask you, Diane, what comes to mind when you think of the word compassion? How would you define that?
What comes to my mind is empathy, or caring, or move to help somebody, sensitivity. Those are the words that come to my mind.
Exactly. So compassion literally means to suffer with. And so compassion is not something that we tend to offer during really wonderful, joyous, celebratory times in our lives. It's something that we want to offer. We feel pulled when people are suffering or struggling, or they've experienced failure or setback. And so the same goes for self-compassion.
So sometimes when people hear the word self-compassion, they might think it's kind of touchy-feely or vague. Is there science or research behind self-compassion?
Absolutely, yes. Thanks for that question. We'll talk a little bit more about that later too. But yes, self-compassion is a psychological concept and it is empirically supported.
Great.
All right, Kelsey. So we know a little bit about what self-compassion is, but then how do we put this into action?
Yes. So self-compassion is a practice. I can't emphasize this enough. There's no such thing as people who are self-compassionate and people who aren't. There's also no such thing as perfecting self-compassion. It's a matter of practicing it to lesser or greater degrees.
I know Tara and I really appreciate Dr. Christine Neff's work on self-compassion, and I think she has 3 components that she talks about. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Kristen Neff is the one who is able to put some empirical evidence behind self-compassion, and she identified the 3 elements of mindful self-compassion. The first being mindfulness, so having a balanced perspective and withholding judgment, particularly when it comes to difficult emotions. So not feeling overly consumed by them, but also not denying them or avoiding them. The second being self-kindness. So treating yourself kindly, particularly when you're struggling or experiencing a failure or setback, the way that you would treat a friend or a loved one. And the third being common humanity. So recognizing that failure and mistakes are all a part of the human condition. So to err and to suffer is to be human, and we all experience that from time to time.
Thank you. What would you say would be some of the benefits of practicing self-compassion?
Some of the really clear and strong benefits that we're seeing in the research is that people who practice self-compassion, they are happier, they are less stressed, and they're more resilient.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and those 3 descriptions are so important right now in this moment. So why else do you think that self-compassion is so important to put into action right now?
Sure. So particularly in this climate, when I think about those 3 elements again, if we just take them one at a time. So mindfulness, having your feelings with perspective. It seems really important to keep that in mind right now because we are all impacted by this pandemic. And I'm hearing from a lot of people, they're criticizing themselves for complaining or feeling sad or anxious or angry or whatever the case may be, when, quote unquote, other people have it worse. And it's really easy to get caught up in that comparison trap. And so taking the mindful stance of self-compassion allows us to honor our own individual struggle with perspective. So without comparing or one-upping, and with recognition of how bad things are in the larger picture. But even still, we can see that our feelings, our personal individual struggles, they're real and they're valid, and honoring that and being with that doesn't take away from others.
So it sounds like there's a lot of self-acceptance there, and that we should really honor our own journey.
Absolutely, yes.
What I'm hearing from a lot of people too is that people are very judgmental about what they're getting done, what they're not getting done during this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
What are you experiencing with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's where we can think about the self-kindness piece of self-compassion, that idea of letting go of comparison and supporting our needs, because I'm also seeing a lot of people judging themselves for being, lazy or demotivated or unproductive. There are definitely days when I wish I could do more than what's happening. And, especially when other people are taking to Instagram or other social media platforms and they're showcasing how much they're doing and getting done while they're staying at home, it's easy to feel like we're not doing enough. And so, I think it's important to keep in mind that we will all deal with this pandemic in our own way. And if we can respond to our needs and our abilities with kindness, the way that we would respond to a friend, then we can be supportive and loving towards ourselves during this difficult time, instead of being harsh and belittling of our pain or expecting extraordinary things of ourselves.
I think you bring up such a good point about just being kind and understanding that we're all in this together, and that this is new for all of us. We both have the shared experience of this pandemic, but yet we're also trying to live our lives. And so where I can really relate, if to get personal, that I have a to-do list. I'm a to-do list person. And when your days start to feel like Groundhog Day and they're just over and over again, and you think like, did I get that done? And what day is it even? And then when you're not completing what you want to, it's so easy to look at someone else and say, hey, it's okay. We're in a tough time right now. But yet to turn it on ourselves, I think is such a really hard thing. It's a hard thing to do, and we're probably not so good at it. Mm-hmm. And it couldn't come at a better time to have this conversation. So, just going back to, we're all in this together, and this is different for all of us. But if we can come out of it having a little bit of a better idea of what self-compassion is and how to practice it, when this is all said and done, man, I wonder what we can apply then.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. And it reminds me of that piece of common humanity that, we are all experiencing the impact of COVID-19 together in this moment in time. And for the vast majority of us, we've not lived through something like this before. So we're all figuring it out as we go. This is our new normal. And so keeping in mind that sense of common humanity will help us to feel less isolated and alone and more connected to one another. And I just really appreciate your point, Tara, that I think we can all be our own worst critics. So keeping in mind that sense of connectedness, I think, is so important.
Yeah. And the other thing that you had said that resonated with me is that, our job really isn't to use somebody else's yardstick to measure our success and where we are. And it's very easy. I know Diane and I have had some really fruitful conversations about just understanding that we're in this together, but yet we're looking at each other and saying, like, I don't know, like, where are we supposed to handle all of this, or what are we supposed to do? But we really appreciate you helping us define self-compassion. So let's think, like, how do we apply some of these concepts to our daily lives?
Yes. One of my clients comes to mind, if I could give her example. She decided that every day when she woke up in the morning, she would have 5 questions for herself. And the first question would be, how do I feel today? And the reason why that question was so important, because it kind of set the day for herself. But did she feel energized? Does she feel tired? And maybe what I'm going to do today, I can really tend to myself and practice that self-kindness or that self-compassion and look at my day in that way. She would include what she was having for dinner, or she'd include what physical activity I want to do today. And maybe if she has a lot of energy, it's running or walking 3 miles. If she doesn't, it's playing in the yard with her dog. So be kind and saying it's okay what I decide to do today. She also had an interesting question too. She would ask, well, what do I want to give to someone else today? And I thought that was really interesting. And we talked about it too, that perhaps some days it might be, what am I going to give myself today? Mm-hmm. That's another part of self-compassion. Mm-hmm. And another piece that Tara and I have talked a lot about too is, what piece of joy can you add to your day? Even if it's just something small.
Mm-hmm. And to add to the piece of joy, I think it's always rich when we can offer some client perspective and some stories of real life, how people are doing these things and practicing some self-compassion. And just as Diane was expressing about one of her clients, I have one that has made a ritual of every morning finding that joy to start the day, so that she has her cup of coffee and she has her glass of water and she practices yoga, and then she reads a devotion. And this is just something she does because the rest of the day, she says she doesn't really know that it's going to be very predictable. But if this is one piece she can hold on to, that this gives her joy. And that's something she came up with on her own, but I think it's such a great example of finding joy.
Right. Sometimes people find comfort in having a phrase for the day, or a mantra for the day, or a statement. One of my clients used to say, what's most important to me today? Let me focus on that. You know what? When I go to bed at night, whatever the day brought was good enough. It's okay what I got under those circumstances, especially now, right? Going through now.
Mhm.
We also, as Kelsey touched on, we don't want to make this pandemic worse for ourselves by being so harsh on ourselves. That's a really important thing to try to practice.
And it kind of reminded me of something, Diane, when you were talking about what's important for me today. And the mantra, I picked it up from somewhere else, but basically it's, what's important now, and really honoring that, even if it's just day by day, and saying, I don't have a whole lot of control of other things that are going on around me. But if I were just to look at today and the next, 12 hours that I'm awake, what's most important? And it really ties in what Diane was saying about like the energy. What do I have energy to do today? And should I be a little bit more honest with myself today and just say, is this a heavy hitter home run day, or is this something in space? So, listening to yourself in that way, and then saying, what's important now?
Right.
What do you think? I'm sorry, as we're pulling on this, do you think of any mantras or whatnot that your clients maybe are needing right now or finding some solace in?
Yeah, well, so something that came to mind is, so in addition to Kristen Neff, I'm also a huge fan of Dr. Brene Brown. And I remember one of the anecdotes she has given in her writings is, oftentimes when we wake up in the morning, the first thought that we have is, I didn't get enough sleep, and how it already sets the tone of not enough. And when things are feeling so unpredictable right now and so kind of unknown, it feels really important to focus on what is the most meaningful to us and what are the things within our control and the things that we can rely on. And I think even just those, like the examples of, having a cup of coffee or a cup of water, and that's the way I'm going to start my day. That is a way of practicing self-kindness. And I often talk to my clients about something I call pleasant events. So ideas of just things that are really simple and not expensive, not time consuming, things that you could either do with yourself or with someone else, maybe virtually even, that, you might easily overlook, but can really add up in big ways in the long run. So something like, smelling your favorite like beverage, or going for a walk, or taking a bath, or taking some time to color. Little things like that add up in big ways.
These are some great ideas.
Very good. Yes.
So, sometimes this is a time where people want to take on some new habits and behaviors. And then sometimes they start and it doesn't work out as well as you thought.
Right.
I don't know. I've had some really neat conversations with people about just getting to the place a couple weeks into this saying, maintenance may be what I need to be doing right now. We talk about this in like Thanksgiving and Christmas. Like, how many gains are we supposed to get here? We're getting through it. And I think this is a really good time to look at our situation and say, is this a time of maintenance? Is it okay to not be, everything out of the park? Is it okay to just take my time with this and just say, each day I'm just going to continue to do what I'm doing well and what I put on my plate? I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. I have several clients that this is maintenance time. That's just not the time to try something brand new or take on a whole new task. Mm-hmm. Okay, right.
Mm-hmm. Diane, you had talked about the whole habit thing earlier today. You should share with us that.
Right. One thing too is if you find this is a time that you really would like to try a new habit, whether it has to do with sleep or maybe eating healthier or moving more or drinking more water, it can often be helpful to start very slowly and simply and not tackle something huge, and maybe make it a simple task for yourself that day. That can also it ties into that self-kindness piece. You can always increase it, but start out small.
Yeah. Be kind about it.
Right. We do have one question. Someone wants to know, what do you say to someone who worries about being a burden to others when they need to talk or ask for help?
I'm happy to start us off. If you have
other
please jump in.
Kelsey. You got this one.
I hear this a lot from clients, people who worry about burdening others. And so I think in that case, if we can maybe flip it for a second and think about what if someone came to you and they needed help and they needed to talk to you or they needed to ask you of something, even if you weren't available in that moment. I think if it was someone that you really care deeply about, you'd let them know, right now I can't do it, but this is really important to me. So can we find another time, right? So can you trust that if you were to do that for someone, that they would do it for you, that they would let you know, I'm here for you, right? It might not be right in this moment, but I want to be there for you. And can you allow yourself to need the help and to ask for the help? Because I think whether we realize it or not, it's so easy to be someone who is giving help rather than receiving help, right? But if we are attaching judgment to receiving help, whether we know it or not, we're also attaching judgment to giving help. So it's like, if it's okay for someone else, it should be okay for you too.
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, it's a great answer.
Oh, it's a good perspective. Yeah. I actually had a client who we were talking about this exact thing, that I don't want to burden anyone because my life is good. I shouldn't have anything to complain about. And my head, and I have food in my belly, and I have my health. That kind of takes us back to the whole piece of just that we are in the shared experience, but our experience is our own, and the way we feel about it is our own.
Yeah.
I think one of the things too that's really interesting about when we ask for help is the win that you get when you get to help somebody. You give somebody the opportunity to help you, and that might be exactly what they need. They might help somebody and they don't know how. And then if you show up and need the help, it fills their tank too.
Absolutely. Self-compassion kind of reminds me of that, what Tara and I talk to clients a lot about is self-care. And when we fill our tank and we feel okay when we're taking care of ourselves, that if we're giving ourselves some self-compassion, it's another way to fill your tank. And that way you don't feel depleted, you feel more energized to help yourself and to help some others. Right. Yeah.
Right. It's hard to be vulnerable.
Especially right now too.
It is. It's hard to say. It's tough, especially when you're trying to lead the charge. Probably some people and their families wanting to remain strong and wanting to look the part. What would you say to somebody who's Kelsey, who's feeling like they have a lot of people dependent on them right now? Hard time being kind to themselves.
Yes. I think they're not alone. I think a lot of people are in that boat right now, and I think that's very real. So first, it's important to validate that people are relying on you, and then also kind of going back to that last point, Diane, about you can't give from an empty vessel, right? So it's kind of like it makes it even more essential that you're taking care of yourself to be able to take care of others.
Right. It's like putting that oxygen mask on, right? When you get on the plane, they tell you to put that on first before you can help anyone else that you're with.
Right. And that feeling you have after you have spent some time filling your tank, you do have more to give. You really do.
You do.
And a more stable foundation to give it from.
Right.
So.
And it sounds like what you're telling us too is that it's important to recognize when we feel that way and
absolutely
draw attention to it.
Yeah, that pressure is real and valid, and it's not for no reason.
Right.
Validation is a word that we probably don't use enough, but it is really our emotions are our emotions, whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent. They are emotions, and owning them is okay. Okay.
We do have one other question from a listener. It's what's the difference between self-compassion and self-pity? Actually.
Yes. So this comes up a lot, I think, especially when the idea of self-compassion, letting go of that harshness and that criticism, I hear a lot of people are worried about then, will I start to slack off? Will I not be so motivated if I'm not being my own worst critic? What would that look like? So this idea that self-compassion is kind of like self-indulgence, it is a pretty common misnomer. So I would say it's important to keep in mind, if we're in this kind of self-pity, self-indulgent place, then that means we're just kind of fulfilling whatever whim we want, whether it's in our best interest or not, right? So oftentimes if we're in kind of like a wallowing kind of place, that's where we're just wanting to like give ourselves whatever we want right now. And it's kind of like a short-term gain, long-term pain. Whereas self-compassion, putting that into practice, it's actually the opposite. It's a longer-term investment in our health and in our well-being. So in that case, it's not always the easiest thing to do. It's not the thing that we want to be doing in that moment, but it's going to pay off for us in the long run.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And my takeaway from what you just said, Kelsey, is it's a practice.
Yes.
It's not something you're going to be good at tomorrow. And just because you know what the concepts are doesn't mean that you're not going to have to put some effort into it and maybe fall forward a little bit on it to at least give it a try.
At least give it a try.
Yeah.
What other resources can you offer, Kelsey, for people who might want more information about self-compassion and the whole topic?
Yes. So I would first recommend self-compassion.org. That's where you can learn more about Dr. Kristen Neff and the research that she's done, the elements of self-compassion, how those are operationally defined. You can also take an empirically validated scale to test your own level of self-compassion, see what you're already strong in and see where are your areas of growth for that. I would also recommend the Center for MSC.org, which is the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. They have a lot of resources. They have a section currently specific to, the response to COVID-19 and meditations around self-compassion that you could put into practice now if you want to get started. The other thing I would say is the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, which is by Drs. Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer. And that's a really user-friendly guide for just kind of step-by-step looking through the different elements of self-compassion, how to put it into practice. And it has some really nice activities built into it, some opportunities to reflect and do some writing, put it into practice and come back and record it. So you can find that, on Amazon and in major bookstores.
Great.
These are some good practical steps to get started and some places.
Absolutely.
And as we have a little bit more time with Amazon, probably we'll be able to check those resources out. Well, I am so appreciative to you, Diane, and you, Kelsey, for your time and for this topic and your expertise, Kelsey. Looks like we have one more question. Hold on. Okay. So Annie has a question about wallowing. I'm guessing that's wallowing.
What does wallowing look like? Can you give an example?
There we go.
Sure. So when I use the word wallowing, I think of someone who's wallowing in self-pity. So someone who's really consumed by it. And it's kind of like, sometimes I reference this kind of like awkward starfish, where it's like stuck to you and it's like all you can see and all you can feel. And so again, it's like whatever I want immediately, kind of that gratification, I'm going to give it to myself. So I'm just kind of, I'm stuck in it. And so then the antidote with self-compassion being like giving yourself some space from that to have that mindful perspective where I can be in my feelings, I can feel disappointed, hurt, sad, whatever it is in that moment without feeling consumed by it.
There's like a separation between the emotion and maybe action. Does that make sense? No.
Maybe how you're responding or reacting.
Yeah, you're reacting to it. Yeah, your response to it. Okay.
Yeah, how you're managing it. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
That's a great visual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, there's been a couple big takeaways for me, and I know that you have three main takeaways, but before we do that, I just thought I would take 1 second and just talk a little bit about the components again, just to summarize a little bit. So we have mindfulness, which is, a balanced perspective without holding judgment. Kindness is treating yourself kindly, kind of the way you would treat a friend. And then common humanity and just recognizing that, failures and not being perfect is part of the human condition. We are human. We're experiencing something together right now as a nation, as a world. And it's kind of put us all a little bit together and maybe being kinder to each other as well, and not just ourselves, but being kinder to the world and the reactions that we're having. What would your three main takeaways be for us today, Kelsey?
Sure. So yeah, I think I would just like to reiterate, if now is a time when you can allow yourself to have your feelings with perspective, let go of comparison and support your needs, whatever they may be, and to remind yourself that we're all in this together, even when we're apart. If that's all that anyone takes away from today, I call that a win.
Yes.
Call to win too.
Right.
Thank you both. This was a lot of fun spending time with you.
Yes.
And people find some benefits and are a little kinder to themselves after tonight.
Practice some self-kindness tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.